The bank tower dominated the downtown skyline, all glass and steel, reflecting a version of the city that believed it had already won. Inside, the lobby gleamed every morning, polished floors, muted conversations, the soft echo of expensive shoes moving with confidence. Executives passed through without looking down, badges swinging from tailored jackets, coffee cups held like trophies of importance. And every night, when the building emptied, Caleb Turner arrived. Caleb was a black man in his late 40s, tall, quiet, with a presence that never demanded attention. He wore a janitor's uniform that smelled faintly of cleaning solution, pushed a cart that squeaked at one loose wheel, and worked the same floors where billion-dollar decisions were made during the day. Most people didn't see him. Those who did rarely remembered him. "Evening," Caleb would say politely as late-working analysts rushed past. Some nodded, most didn't. Caleb cleaned slowly, deliberately, not because he lacked urgency, but because he noticed things. Whiteboards left uncovered, financial projections abandoned on desks, half-erased equations that told stories no one thought a janitor could read. What none of the executives knew was that before Caleb ever picked up a mop, he had been an analyst himself. Years ago, a market collapse had erased his firm overnight. A lawsuit followed. Then a divorce. Then silence. Caleb didn't lose his mind for numbers. He lost his access to rooms where numbers were discussed, so he adapted. While scrubbing floors and emptying trash, Caleb listened. He memorized patterns. He reconstructed strategies from fragments. At night, in his small apartment, he rebuilt models on an old laptop, refining ideas sharper than the ones being pitched upstairs. One morning, during a quarterly earnings briefing, Caleb was mopping near the glass conference room. Inside sat the bank's senior executives, all white men in pressed suits, voices confident, dismissive. "The mid-market fund isn't scalable," one of them said. "Too risky," another added. "We'll pass," the CEO concluded. Caleb paused. The numbers on the screen behind them told a different story. Later that day, Caleb carefully typed out a proposal. Clean. Conservative. Backed by data. He printed it, placed it in a plain folder, and slid it under the door of the executive offices. It sat there for 2 weeks. Unopened. One afternoon, as Caleb wiped fingerprints from a marble wall, he overheard laughter from the corner office. "Someone left a joke proposal in my inbox," an executive said. "Probably from maintenance," another replied. They laughed again. Caleb didn't react. He finished his shift, clocked out, and went home. That night, he sent the same proposal, anonymously, to a competing investment firm across town. By morning, they replied. By the end of the week, they asked to meet. And by the time the bank executives finally realized the opportunity they had ignored, they would be sitting across from the same man they had never bothered to see, not holding a mop, not standing quietly in the corner, but negotiating terms that would decide whether their bank survived the year. Because Caleb Turner had never stopped understanding money. The only thing the bank had misjudged was who was allowed to understand it. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, early enough to signal seriousness, but late enough to suggest caution. Caleb Turner arrived 10 minutes early, not because he was nervous, but because habits formed over decades didn't disappear when circumstances changed. He wore a simple charcoal suit, clean and well-fitted, but unremarkable. No flashy watch, no visible status, just intention. The lobby of the competing investment firm felt different from the bank tower he cleaned every night. Smaller, less polished, more alert. People looked up when he walked in. A receptionist smiled. "Mr. Turner, they're ready for you." That alone told him something. Inside the conference room, 3 partners waited. 2 men and 1 woman, all white, all experienced enough to recognize value when it walked in quietly. The proposal lay printed on the table, marked with notes, tabs, and highlighted figures. "You sent this anonymously," one of them said, gesturing toward the pages. "Why?" Caleb sat down calmly. Because ideas shouldn't depend on introductions, he replied. They exchanged glances. Where did you get this data? The woman asked. Some of it isn't public. Caleb nodded. It's reconstructible, if you know where to look. No arrogance. No apology. They spent the next hour dissecting the proposal, stress scenarios, risk exposure, exit strategies. Caleb answered everything without hesitation, correcting assumptions gently, explaining decisions clearly. He didn't dominate the room, he guided it. At one point, one of the partners leaned back and said, "You've done this before." "Yes," Caleb replied. "Why aren't you doing it now?" Caleb paused, not because the answer was difficult, but because it was familiar. Because access isn't always tied to ability, he said. Sometimes it's tied to timing, and sometimes to perception. Silence followed. Then the woman closed the folder slowly. "This fund," she said, "could outperform anything on the street this quarter." Caleb nodded. "That's why I wrote it." They didn't ask about his current job. They didn't need to. By the end of the meeting, terms were being discussed, quietly, carefully, the kind of conversation that assumed momentum, not permission. Outside, as Caleb stepped back onto the street, his phone vibrated. A message from his supervisor at the bank. "Don't forget, executive floor needs extra attention tonight. Big day tomorrow." Caleb read it, then slipped the phone back into his pocket. That night, he pushed his cart across the same marble floors as always. The same executives worked late, unaware that a parallel conversation was unfolding blocks away, one that involved their market share, their credibility, their future. In the corner office, the CEO spoke loudly into a phone. "We've got a liquidity problem," he said. "I don't know how we missed it." Caleb wiped the glass wall slowly. He knew, because the solution they needed was the one they had laughed at, still sitting unread in a digital trash folder attached to the name they never bothered to remember. What they didn't know yet was that by the time they realized their mistake, the leverage would no longer be theirs. It would belong to the man they passed every night without looking up, the janitor who understood their numbers better than they did, and who was now deciding whether they were worth saving at all. The first sign of trouble arrived as a calendar invite marked URGENT. It appeared on every senior executive's schedule just after 7 a.m., sent by the bank's risk committee with no explanation. By 8:30, they were seated around the long glass table on the executive floor, coffee untouched, confidence already thinning. "The mid-market exposure is worse than projected," the CFO said, scrolling through charts. "Liquidity is tighter than we thought." The CEO frowned. "We reviewed this last quarter." "Yes," the CFO replied carefully, "but the assumptions were optimistic." Someone swore under their breath. By noon, rumors were moving through the building. A competing firm was raising a new fund, aggressively, quietly, targeting the exact gap the bank had failed to address. Analysts whispered about clients shifting meetings, about capital moving. By late afternoon, the name surfaced: Turner Capital Advisory. The CEO froze when he heard it. "I've seen that proposal," he said slowly. "Weeks ago." The room went silent. "You mean the one you joked about?" another executive asked. The CEO didn't answer. Panic doesn't look like shouting in boardrooms like this. It looks like restraint cracking, phones ringing and going unanswered, assistants being told to find out everything. By evening, confirmation arrived. The competing firm had not only adopted the strategy, they had refined it, backed it, and placed a single name at the center of negotiations: Caleb Turner, the janitor, the man who cleaned their offices every night. The realization landed unevenly. One executive laughed once, sharply. "That's not possible." Another stood up, pacing. "We need to talk to him, now." That night, as Caleb polished the same conference table where panic had unfolded hours earlier, a voice stopped him. "Caleb." He turned. The CEO stood alone, jacket off, tie loosened, face pale in a way Caleb had never seen before. "Can we talk?" the CEO asked. Caleb nodded. Of course. They sat at opposite ends of the table. "You sent that proposal," the CEO said. "Yes." "You understand what's happening," the CEO continued. "This fund, it could destabilize us." Caleb folded his hands calmly. "It could," he agreed. The CEO swallowed. "Why didn't you come to us directly?" Caleb looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. "I did," he said. "You laughed." The words hung in the air, unarguable. The CEO leaned back slowly. "What do you want?" Caleb didn't rush the answer. "I want the deal to be signed," he said, "on fair terms, and I want my role recognized." The CEO nodded quickly. "Of course, we can make that happen." Caleb stood, adjusting his uniform. "I don't think you can," he said calmly. "Not anymore." The CEO's eyes widened. "By the time you noticed me," Caleb continued, "I had already chosen who would listen." Silence. "I clean this building," Caleb said, voice steady. "But I don't need it." He pushed his cart toward the door. Behind him, the CEO spoke softly, not with authority, but with something close to regret. "We should have seen you." Caleb paused once, hand on the door. "You did," he said. "You just decided what I was worth." Then he left. And for the first time since the bank was built, the most important negotiation of its year would happen without them in control, decided by the man they had ignored while he quietly learned everything they were too comfortable to question. The signing took place in a room the bank executives had never been invited into. It wasn't a corner office with skyline views or a conference hall lined with portraits of former CEOs. It was a modest boardroom at the competing firm, clean, efficient, intentionally unremarkable, the kind of space where decisions were made without theatrics. Caleb Turner sat at the table, hands resting calmly beside a thin stack of documents. Across from him were the partners who had listened when it mattered. Outside the glass walls, phones buzzed non-stop. Market analysts were already speculating. Capital was moving. Quietly, quickly, decisively. The deal was signed without celebration. No applause, no handshakes held too long, just signatures placed where they belonged. By the end of the week, the impact was unmistakable. Clients began withdrawing from the bank, not dramatically, strategically. A percentage here, a fund there, enough to force uncomfortable conversations behind closed doors. Share prices dipped, press releases softened their language. Inside the bank tower, the mood shifted. Executives stopped laughing in hallways. Meetings stretched longer. Decisions were second-guessed. And every night, the cleaning crew continued their work, except for one cart that never returned. Caleb didn't give notice. He didn't need to. His supervisor sent a brief email the following Monday, asking whether he planned to return. Caleb replied politely, thanking him for the opportunity and wishing the team well. That was it. Weeks later, the bank announced a restructuring, new leadership, a renewed commitment to inclusive innovation. The words sounded sincere. They always did after the damage was done. One evening, as Caleb walked past the bank tower on his way home, he stopped across the street. Through the glass, he could see the executive floor lit up, people still working late, still trying to solve problems that no longer belonged to them. For years, he had stood inside that building and watched power move past him without noticing. Now, he watched it struggle without his help. Caleb didn't feel satisfaction. He felt clarity. He had never wanted revenge. He had wanted recognition, not of himself, but of the idea that intelligence does not wear uniforms people expect. The deal he signed didn't destroy the bank. It simply revealed it. And as Caleb turned away and continued down the street, blending into the city like any other passerby, one truth remained unshaken. They had ignored a janitor because they believed worth was visible, and in doing so, they handed their future to the one person who understood them better than they ever understood him. Not because he demanded to be seen, but because he never stopped paying attention.